Your government is rationing your next meal right now and you don't even know it. Every loaf of bread you buy is a political calculation. Every price tag at the grocery store is a thread holding the social contract together. And when that thread snaps, governments don't reform. They collapse. The pattern is ancient. The execution is surgical. And you are standing exactly where they want you. This is not about supply and demand. This is about the moment your stomach becomes the battlefield where legitimacy dies. Let me show you the map. Let me show you where you are on it. And let me show you what happens next when food stops being a commodity and becomes a weapon pointed at the state itself. Right now, somewhere on this planet, a government official is staring at two numbers that will decide whether their regime survives the year. The first number is the global price of wheat. The second number is the percentage of their population that will riot if bread costs 10% more tomorrow. This is not speculation. This is the daily arithmetic of survival for 70 countries. They are calculating how long they can absorb the difference between what food costs on the world market and what their citizens can afford to pay without burning the capital to the ground. In Tunisia, in December 2010, a street vendor lit himself on fire after police seized his fruit cart. 2 weeks later, the president fled the country. In Egypt, food subsidies were consuming 8% of the entire national budget by 2011, 44% of all government spending. The government was selling bread below cost. The market price of wheat had spiked 84%. The math stopped working. Within months, Mubarak was gone. In Syria, a 3-year drought from 2006 to 2009 destroyed 40% of the agricultural sector. Rural populations flooded into cities. Food prices climbed. The government had no cushion left. The civil war that followed killed 500,000 people. These were not coincidences. These were executions carried out by the same invisible mechanism, the food shock cycle, and it has been killing regimes for centuries. Here is what you need to understand. Food is not just a need. Food is the original political contract, the one that predates constitutions and elections and rights. The deal is simple. You stay in power, we get to eat. When that deal breaks, both sides know exactly what comes next. Governments know it. Citizens know it. History has taught this lesson in blood over and over again. The French Revolution did not start with philosophy. It started with bread riots in 1789 after a failed harvest sent prices through the ceiling. The wave of revolutions across Europe in 1848 followed years of crop failures and potato blight. The Russian Revolution in 1917 was sparked by food protests in Petrograd. Women demanding bread marched into the streets and the Romanov dynasty fell within days. The Soviet Union itself collapsed in part because grain production failed in the 1980s and the state could no longer feed its people without becoming a net importer. That erosion of self-sufficiency hollowed out legitimacy from the inside. But you are not here for a history lesson. You are here because this cycle is active right now. You are here because the same pattern that toppled empires is running silently beneath your grocery bill, and you have been trained not to see it. Let me show you the anatomy of the trap. This brings us to stage 1, the subsidy trap. A government decides it cannot afford political unrest, so it intervenes. It subsidizes staple foods, bread, rice, cooking oil. The goal is stability. Keep prices low, keep stomachs full, keep streets calm. On paper, this works. In reality, it creates a fiscal time bomb. Because once you start subsidizing food, you cannot stop. The subsidy becomes an entitlement. Touch it and you trigger riots. Egypt learned this in 1977. President Sadat tried to cut subsidies under pressure from the IMF and the World Bank. The result was 3 days of chaos, 800 dead. Sadat reversed the cuts immediately. The lesson was clear. Subsidies are politically untouchable, which means they grow and grow and grow. By 2011, Egypt was spending more than twice what it collected in revenue just to keep bread cheap. The subsidy was not feeding people anymore. It was feeding itself. Then comes stage 2, import dependency. Most countries that subsidize food do not grow enough food domestically to sustain the subsidy, so they import heavily. Egypt imports 60% of its wheat, mostly from Russia and Ukraine. Jordan imports 95%, Tunisia imports 75%, This creates a second trap. Your subsidy budget is now tied to global commodity prices. Prices you do not control. Prices set by weather patterns in Kansas and trade wars in Beijing and droughts in Australia. When global wheat prices double, your subsidy costs double. When they spike 80% in a single year, like they did in 2008 and 2010, your entire fiscal system shudders. You are not in control anymore. The market is. Stage 3 is where the system turns. The fiscal vice. You are subsidizing food. You are importing most of it. And now the global price is spiking. Your options narrow to 3. You can cut the subsidy and face riots. You can raise taxes and face unrest. Or you can borrow and go deeper into debt. Most governments choose door 3. They borrow from the IMF, from the World Bank, from regional powers. The debt piles up. The interest payments grow. And every year more of the budget goes to servicing debt instead of providing services. Health, education, infrastructure, all of it gets squeezed. The population feels the decline. They see the state failing, and the subsidy that was supposed to buy stability becomes a noose around the government's neck. You cannot afford it, you cannot cut it, and every month the math gets worse. Stage 4. The legitimacy collapse. Here is where perception becomes reality. People stop seeing the subsidy as a gift. They see it as proof that the state is incompetent. If the government has to sell bread at half the cost just to keep people from rioting, that tells you the economy is broken. If the government is borrowing billions to pay for food, that tells you the state is weak. If you are standing in line for subsidized bread, while the elite eat imported luxury goods, that tells you the system is rigged. The subsidy meant to stabilize the regime becomes evidence of its failure. And once that perception sets in, it metastasizes. Every price hike feels like betrayal. Every shortage feels like corruption. Every delay feels like collapse. The population is not angry just about food anymore. They are angry about everything. And food is the rallying point. The thing everyone understands. The thing everyone needs. The thing the state promised it would provide. Stage 5. The triggering event. This is the moment when the math runs out. A drought in a supplier country. A trade embargo. A currency devaluation that makes imports suddenly unaffordable. A global financial shock. A pandemic. The trigger does not matter. What matters is that the government can no longer maintain the subsidy and maintain solvency at the same time. So it makes a choice. And every choice is fatal. If it cuts the subsidy, the streets erupt immediately. If it keeps the subsidy, it accelerates toward bankruptcy. If it tries to thread the needle with partial cuts or rationing, it signals weakness and the population smells blood. There is no good option. Because stage 5 is not about options anymore. It is about the inevitable conclusion of a trap that was set in stage 1. Stage 6. Collapse. The food riots start. They are not just about food. They are about decades of accumulated grievances. Corruption, unemployment, inequality, repression. All of it compressed into rage. And food is the match. The protests spread. The government cracks down. The crackdown radicalizes the movement. The movement splits the security forces. The security forces fracture. The elite abandon ship. And the regime that looked invincible 6 months ago is gone. Not reformed. Not restructured. Gone. Because food shocks do not produce gradual transitions. They produce ruptures. Sudden, violent, irreversible. You are sitting there thinking this is a developing world problem. You are wrong. This cycle runs everywhere. The only difference is the buffer. Rich countries have bigger buffers. They have stronger currencies. They have deeper credit markets. They can absorb food price shocks without immediate collapse. But the mechanism is the same. Food prices spike. Governments intervene. Subsidies balloon. Fiscal pressure builds. And at some point, the buffer runs out. Look at Europe in 2022 and 2023. Multiple governments flirted with price controls on food. France negotiated deals with retailers to cap prices. Hungary imposed actual controls. The UK considered it. Why? Because food inflation was hitting double digits and populations were angry. The same logic, the same trap. Just moving slower because the starting conditions are better, but moving nonetheless. Now let me show you where you are. Check your own grocery bill over the last 3 years. Prices are up. Check your government's response. Subsidies, tax breaks, targeted relief. check the fiscal deficit. Growing, check the debt to GDP ratio. Rising, check the political rhetoric. Leaders promising to control prices, promising to shield citizens from market volatility. This is stage 2. Import dependency locked in. Fiscal vice tightening. The buffer is shrinking. You cannot see it day to day, but the math is moving. The gap between what food costs to import and what citizens can afford to pay is widening. And every time a government steps in to bridge that gap, they take one more step into the trap. The countries most at risk right now are obvious. Sub-Saharan Africa. Food import dependency is over 85% in some regions. They rely on wheat imports for daily survival. A single bad harvest in Russia or Argentina and prices spike beyond what these governments can subsidize. The Middle East, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Pakistan, all running the same playbook. Massive subsidies, massive debt, massive vulnerability. South Asia, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar. Populations in the hundreds of millions. Subsidy systems already under strain. Reserves dwindling. One shock away from riots. But do not make the mistake of thinking this is contained. Food is the original systemic risk. It does not respect borders. It does not care about GDP. It hits everyone eventually, because everyone eats. And when food stops being affordable, political stability stops being possible. Here is the mechanism at work. Global food prices are not set by local conditions. They are set by global supply and global demand. That means when China buys up grain reserves to hedge against drought, it pushes up prices for everyone. When speculators flood commodity markets to bet on future scarcity, they drive volatility that has nothing to do with actual food supply. Studies estimate that 10 to 25% of current food price levels are driven purely by speculative trading. Not production, not logistics, speculation, financial institutions gambling on food futures. Every bet they place makes food more expensive for the family buying rice in Lagos or Cairo or Dhaka. The market does not care if you are hungry. It cares if you can pay. And here is the cruelest part. The subsidy meant to protect you from that market makes you more vulnerable to it over time, because subsidies distort the entire system. When bread is sold below cost, domestic production becomes uneconomical. Why would a farmer grow wheat if the government will buy it from abroad cheaper? So domestic agriculture withers. The import dependency deepens. The subsidy gets more expensive. The trap tightens. This is not a conspiracy. This is a business model. Governments are not trying to trap their populations. They are trying to stay in power. The subsidy is a rational response to an impossible situation. But rationality does not save you from math. The math says you cannot subsidize food indefinitely while importing most of it at prices you do not control. The math says the gap will widen. The math says the buffer will run out. The math says collapse is a question of when, not if. So what do? First, stop pretending your food security is guaranteed. It is not. Check where your food comes from. If you live in a country that imports more than 50% of its staple foods, you are in the blast radius. If your government subsidizes food, you are in the trap. If global commodity prices have spiked in the last 5 years and your grocery bill reflects it, you're feeling the pressure. Acknowledge it. Most people walk through the supermarket in a fog. They see higher prices and blame the store, or the farmers, or the politicians. They do not see the system. You need to see the system. Second, understand that government intervention in food prices is not a solution. It is a delay mechanism. When your government announces subsidies or price controls, they are buying time, not fixing the problem. The problem is structural. It is global, and it cannot be solved by local fiscal policy. The subsidy is a band-aid on a hemorrhage. It will hold for a while, and then it will not. Your job is to know when the band-aid is slipping. Watch the fiscal deficit. Watch the debt levels. Watch the reserve currency holdings. Watch the bond markets. When those indicators start flashing red, the subsidy is on borrowed time. Plan accordingly. Third, diversify your own food exposure. This does not mean hoard. It means adapt. If you rely entirely on subsidized staples, you are locked into the same trap as your government. You eat what they can afford to import. You eat what they can afford to subsidize. When the subsidy breaks, your diet breaks. Build redundancy. Grow what you can. Buy local when possible. Understand where your calories come from and have alternatives. This is not survivalist paranoia, this is basic risk management. Food shocks move fast. By the time the riots start, the shelves are already empty.